everyone. Welcome back to the Pro Bono Happy Hour. I'm Eva Richardson, the law firm Pro Bono project assistant at PBI. This week, I spoke with Meg Spencer-Dixon, founder of Spencer Consulting. Meg is a lawyer and expert specializing in time management, project management, and stress management for lawyers and legal professionals. During the interview, Meg offers practical tips and techniques for better time management, best practices for setting up a to-do system, and more. Meg is a friend of PBI and has spoken at our annual conference. We're excited to bring you this special episode and share Meg's knowledge, which will no doubt help us all be more efficient in our daily lives and with our efforts to provide access to justice for all. We hope you enjoy the interview. Hi, Meg. Welcome to the Pro Bono Happy Hour, and thanks for joining us today. I hope your summer's going well so far.
Absolutely it is. Thank you so much for having me here.
We're really excited to have you on for this special episode about time management for lawyers. I think it's funny that we're talking to people about time management on a podcast because people typically listen to podcasts in their spare time. So I wanted to sort of set the stage by asking, in your view, why aren't people too busy to listen to this? What is time management and why is it important?
Well, I think there probably are a lot of people who are too busy
right?
who aren't listening to this. But I love the fact that it's a podcast because although usually I am negative about multitasking, there are certain situations where it makes perfect sense to multitask, and that's one of the beauties of podcasting. So I'm hoping some people are fruitfully multitasking perhaps by exercising or maybe doing household chores and listening to this as well. So that's certainly one of the goals of this. So you ask, what is time management? And I always say there really is no such thing as time management. I can't even imagine what managing time might be. But think of it as a shorthand term for self-management with respect to time. So because it's self-management, that also underscores how important it is to have a positive attitude and to try new things because it's self-management, there's a great deal of the self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you go into it saying, this isn't going to work, that isn't going to work, you can prove yourself right. However, if you have a positive attitude and are open to new things, it's amazing what you can accomplish. You also asked why it's important. Well, the thing about time management is it really is choosing what to do from moment to moment and the methods you use to decide what you do from moment to moment. And the reason it's absolutely crucial is that absolutely literally how we choose to use our time moment by moment, day by day, week by week at work directly affects how our careers go and how we end up choosing to use our time moment by moment, day by day, week by week outside of work directly affects how the rest of our lives go. And what can be more important than taking the time to figure out what it is we want to accomplish in our work, in our lives outside of work? I mean, hopefully we have a long time period to do that, but it's not endless. Right. Where I think we get the term deadline. But that's really why I teach time management, is to help people figure out what it is they want to accomplish and how best to get there, because I can't think of anything really more important than that. It really is a very big picture kind of thing.
No, definitely. I think that's a good way to think about it, is self-management with respect to time. I like that. And I'm interested to hear more about your background and Spencer Consulting and how you started doing what you're doing.
Sure. Well, I'm a lawyer, and I practiced in big law for a number of years. And while it was fine, I realized early on that it wasn't something I wanted to do for the rest of my career. But since I'd gone straight through college and law school, I really wasn't good for anything else. So a good part of my time in big law was spent with part of me thinking, well, what else am I good for? Right. And during my last few years of practicing, I knew I probably wanted to go into business for myself. So I was out there trying to figure out what area to go into. And I remember I read a wonderful book called Growing a Business. And they said something about, if you find a business that's really right for you, you will realize that you've been preparing for it your whole life without even realizing it. And I remember when I read that sentence, the idea, time management for lawyers, just popped into my head. And it was, I think, 4 months later when I left my firm to go into doing that. And when I decided to start doing time management for lawyers, which is why I founded the Spencer Consulting business, because that's 90% of what I do. I also do now, at this point, project management and stress management. But time management really is the bulk of it. When I started doing it, I was in a perfect mindset for starting something new, because I remembered, and I was in my early 30s at the time, and I remember thinking, I'm prepared to fail at this, but what I'm not prepared to do is to live with the regret of never having tried. And I share that with you because there's maybe some people listening to this right now who may be on the brink of some sort of major decision and they're not quite sure, which way to go. And just to have that mindset, or to think about having that mindset, I think can be very helpful, because so many people are afraid to fail that they don't even try. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you kind of think, well, I'll do my best and see where I go, you almost get an invincible mindset. I'll see where it goes, and it's amazing what you'd accomplish if you even try.
Definitely. Was it hard starting out, or how was?
Well, it's interesting. It wasn't as hard. It wasn't that hard because I didn't know what I didn't know. Uh-huh. There were some unknown unknowns. Yeah. What I approached it very, very analytically, and I learned more about time management. I learned more about delivering presentations. I learned more about consulting. Mm-hmm. And what I didn't know was all about the marketing. I thought, I'll just come up with a great product and it'll be the path to my door. And as I now know, that's not the way it works. Uh-huh. So had I known about the challenge of marketing, I would have been much more scared. Right. But fortunately, I didn't know, so I wasn't. Okay. And so I learned basically, and very much by trial and error, how to do that. How I ended up doing it and building a reputation from scratch. Mm-hmm. I was doing a lot of pro bono work at the beginning, and then using that as a testimonial letters, and then using that to parlay into paid business, which really took a couple of years. Mm-hmm. So as it turned out, that was the way to do it in that time frame. It's what's been interesting now. I've been doing this now since 1992, so that's 24 years. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that's really changed is, of course, technology over that almost quarter century. I literally remember walking to the library and sitting down with Martindale and handwriting the name of all the law firms out there. So I must say the technology has certainly made marketing and contacting law firms a lot easier.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Great. Well, that's really interesting to hear how you started doing this. So moving on, I guess, can we talk about particularly why time management is important for lawyers and what unique challenges lawyers face?
Sure. Well, time management is important for lawyers because time management is important for everyone, because this is the one irreplaceable resource we all have. It's kind of like the raw material with which we create our lives. And maybe 95% of the time management challenges that lawyers face are the same kind of time management challenges faced by anyone with a demanding professional career. Yep. Lots to do, lots to juggle, lots of people, lots of information to synthesize. Where time management is unique for lawyers really falls under the fact that lawyers are subject to various ethical requirements. Mm-hmm. Any licensed attorney has, and I'm certainly still a licensed attorney, and even an inactive attorney is subject to the ethical requirements. Mm-hmm. And when you sit down and actually read through the rules, you'll actually see that there are a lot of things that are relevant to time management. I know that they differ somewhat from state to state, but for the most part, it says, lawyers, and I'm reading now from the D.C. Rules of Professional Conduct, which I think is pretty representative of other states, but it says a lawyer shall act with reasonable promptness in representing a client. Mm-hmm. A lawyer should be competent, prompt, and diligent. And you won't find a jurisdiction that doesn't want its lawyers to be competent, prompt, and diligent. And that's a big difference, because if you are not subject to this ethical requirement, it's on you if you're not prompt and diligent, but it's not something that you could possibly be disciplined for. Mm-hmm. And if you also go through the rules, you'll find that there are a lot of specific things that lawyers are required to do promptly, like complying with reasonable requests for information from clients. As a matter of fact, lawyers are also supposed to ethically control their workloads so that each matter can be handled adequately. And in some states shouldn't even accept representation, and in other states shouldn't even continue representation in a matter unless it can be performed competently, promptly, and to completion. Mm-hmm. So this is kind of common sense applied, but the fact that it's in the ethical rules kind of raises that to the higher standard. And also what's very important is for lawyers who are working on billable hour arrangements. Mm-hmm. It's funny, I recently did a seminar for a major law firm, and I like to do my due diligence and speak to some people in advance and do surveys and questionnaires. And one very junior associate's comment in the survey was, well, since we're basically judged on how many hours we build, there's no incentive to be efficient. Could you please speak to that? And I marked that with a big red X. And it's like, well, let me give you two incentives for efficiency. Yeah. One is, if you want to get a reputation in the firm for for somebody who is efficient in
Right.
their work. I trust, believe me, and I rarely say believe me, I say try it for yourself, but the one thing that I can say that I'm confident of, the people you're working for roughly know how long things should take, and if you end up, spinning that out to get in more hours, they will become aware of it.
Right.
And the other one is let's say a lawyer. I'm reading now from the comment for the rule on fees for the DC Rules of Professional Conduct. A lawyer should not exploit a fee arrangement based primarily on hourly charges by using wasteful procedures. And I know that many states have that comment, and even those that don't, all do have the requirement that lawyers basically be honest, and being dishonest about hours in that way certainly would fall under that rubric. So that's one big place where time management is different for lawyers. I mean, they shouldn't be doing anything differently, but the consequences of not doing it kind of yawn much wider.
Exactly.
So I would say that's the big difference for lawyers as opposed to non-lawyers.
Yeah, we so often hear from people at firms that we work with day to day that they're feeling overwhelmed and under stress. And it's a universal problem. Everyone kind of finds themselves facing it at times. So I know this is a big question, but what are some general tips you have to help attorneys better deal with their workload every day?
Sure. Well, I have a couple approaches. I'll start with kind of philosophical way to look at it, and then I'll talk about some very specific practical techniques. And because I'll start with the philosophical approach, because a lot of time management is actually mental gymnastics, training yourself to think about things in a way that reduces the stress rather than increases the stress.
Right.
And a way to increase the stress is to think, I've got so much to do and not enough time to do it. How am I ever going to get anything done? Now, the interesting thing about time is it is the one resource that is completely democratically distributed. Everybody has the same number of hours in a day. And what that means is we really can't say, I don't have enough time. The question is, what am I going to do during that time? And if you look at it from, here's what I need to get done, how can I cram it into the day, that adds to stress. So I suggest you back up and say, look at it almost like the way you look at money, saying, this is my budget, this is my time budget. I have 24 hours in a day. So my goal is to figure out what are the 24 hours worth of the most important things that I can get done today. And of course, when you add in things like, those little things like sleep and other life maintenance activities, you realize the time that you really can choose what to do with it is much less than that, which makes it all the more important to be mindful and deliberate about how you choose your time. But what that means is if you're thinking about the budget, instead of saying, I've got so much to buy and not enough money to buy it with, well, some people might say that. But the reality is, if you say, this is what I have, the money I have, or this is the time I have, what can I do with it? That reduces the stress because you say, I can't do everything. I need to be strategic about choosing the most important things. And you say, I've got, 8 or 10 hours worth of time to invest. How best should I use that? And then when you've done that, the goal should be, I put in a full day's work. How best can I like to say the generic goal when I talk with attorneys is you want to be the best attorney you can be. And after you've put in a full day's work, what is the thing you can do to achieve that goal? And that is to go home and rest and relax and have good quality R&R and get a good night's sleep so that you can come in the next day ready to do good work. So I think it's important for people to think about what is the optimal amount of time they should be working each day, each week, because all of us have enough things on our to-do list that if we had the inclination and the stamina, we probably could be doing it for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But that's obviously not optimal or sustainable. And the thing about time management is it's to be deliberative and careful about how you make those choices. I'll also say this, and I really, the question you asked is kind of a big question, so I'm going to give you a big answer with lots of different aspects to it. But a very helpful way to think about it is this. We've all heard the phrase, time is money, and there are lots of things wrong with that phrase. One of the things that's wrong with it is this. It is possible to cease spending money for a given period of time. In this society, that would probably be a very short period of time, but it is physically possible to do so. However, the nature of time is such that we literally cannot cease using time. As long as we're alive, we're always doing something, even sitting in your office, staring out the window, doing what most people would think of as nothing. really is a form of something from a time use perspective. So what that means is inevitably, since we're using time, we're deciding how we're using our time. And we either make those time use decisions consciously by figuring out what do I want to accomplish, what steps do I need to get there, and how I come up with a plan and try to stick with the plan, but modify the plan as circumstances change. But what too many people do is they say, I can't really plan because who knows who's going to, what fires are going to come out today or what emergencies I'm going to have to deal with. I just have to respond to whatever comes in that day. Doing it the second way is basically making your time use decisions by default. And what I challenge everyone to do is make your time use decisions consciously and not by default, because when you make it consciously, it's so important because that's how you accomplish what you want to accomplish rather than reacting to what's out there. So the key time management question is always, what's the best use of my time right now?
Yep.
So at some level you should be thinking that. But if you're constantly thinking that without any sort of system to make sure that decision is sound, you're kind of still flailing around. And that's where we come to, and you can call it different things, the to-do system, the task management system. I'm a big fan of calling it whatever you want, but basically you need some sort of system to keep track of things to do that you're not going to do in that moment. So let's just call it your to-do list or your to-do system. And that really is the core of anybody's time management system, because it's not just, here's a list of things I have to do. It really is the written buttress to help you decide how, what should I be doing next. So talking about to-do lists, the idea is you want to come up with a system so that you have an external inventory of tasks, of things that you want to consider doing. And the form, whether you have it handwritten or word processed or whether you have it in one of the many apps or databases, is almost beside the point. The idea is you want to have any system other than just keeping it in your head. And I do know people who basically their system is, I just kind of remember it. Actually, I remember one client who even said, yes, I remember, I keep it all in my head, and if I've forgotten something, it's okay because I don't remember it anyway. And I think that's an extremely dangerous and stressful approach, especially, for lawyers with the whole risk of, if you drop the ball, who knows what, that might balloon to, malpractice-wise and attorney discipline-wise. Right. But the idea is, think about this to-do system as kind of it's just a parking place. It's an external memory for the things you want to do. And I'll talk about format second. I want to talk first about sort of the best practice conceptually, how you want to think about your to-do system. The image I like to draw is, think of a pyramid and divide it horizontally into 3 layers. At the base of the pyramid, I've called it multiple things over the years. First I called it the master list, but I think that scared people. So now I call it the longer-term list. And when I say list, it can be an actual list, it can be a database, it can be Excel. It's anything other than in your brain. But basically what should be in that longer-term list is pretty much everything you want to do, want to think about doing from now until the end of time in all possible areas of your life. And what most people think of when they hear me describe that, they kind of freak out. And I remember one particular client really did. He balked when I suggested he do a data dump and just get his longer-term list up and running. He said, no, I'm not going to do that, because if I did, I'd have a 37-page to-do list. I don't want to deal with having a 37-page to-do list. And I said, in some circumstances, a limited form of denial is actually a pretty good coping strategy, but this isn't one of them, because if you don't, you still have 37 pages worth of things you want to do. But instead of having them in a format where you can at least begin to make good decisions about how to approach them, they're just running around in your mind, freaking you out, stressing you out, and probably really slowing up your mental RAM. So it's important to realize that just because something makes it to this, longer-term list, it's not a commitment ever to doing it. It's merely a commitment to reviewing the list periodically to say, okay, this is something I want to do in the nearer term. So within that list, it may be just very general, but what you also want to include in that, especially if you're a busy attorney, is to have some project-specific or matter case-specific lists. Because the first thing you should do pretty much whenever you start a new project is sit down and just brainstorm, okay, well, what are we trying to accomplish, and have the conversations with other people as necessary for this. But once you figure out what the goal is, brainstorm what are the various steps, who's going to do what and when, and do all that kind of thinking on paper. And that's one of the other benefits of keeping this kind of to-do system, because kept up it allows you more easily to juggle multiple projects. If you try to keep it all in your head, there's no way you can manage all those balls in your head. But if you have them written in a plan, juggling means going from one plan to the next, and you just get yourself back up to speed, reviewing what you're going to be doing next. Or even, I encourage people, if you do keep project-specific to-do lists, use that place not just as to-dos, but also as a reminder for what to do next and what your train of thought was, so that if you are pulled away, you have a little aide-memoire to remind yourself how to get the train back up to speed. But consider those project-specific to-do lists as incorporated within the master list or that longer-term list. And then periodically, and a reasonable period for a kind of review of the master list is a week or so. I'm very flexible about how frequently to do it. I hesitate to say it must be done every week, because people aren't going to do it every week. And if you don't do it one week, they'll think, oh, I blew it. Why keep it up? So it's just a week-ish, or shorter term. 2 days, 10 days. Especially if you have a major deadline that doesn't correspond to the week. Just do it when you finish that major deadline. But that's when you want to review everything in that master list and say, what do I want to do in the shorter term? And so what you want to do periodically is go through that longer-term list or that master list and figure out what do I want to focus on in the shorter term. And a week is a good default time period for that shorter-term time period. And then you want to create a plan of the things you want to do in the coming week or so. And here's where you want to be very ruthless about how you prioritize things, because you want to keep that shorter-term plan relatively short. I should also say here that when you're feeding tasks to the shorter-term plan, within that longer-term list, you really should be chopping larger projects down into its component parts. So it's not just, write brief. It's, review issue 1, review issue 2, research issue 2, draft for issue 3. And what I usually get the pushback when I describe my suggestion of coming up with a detailed to-do list for all of your projects, I can just tell people are thinking, oh my goodness, I'm so busy, and you think I should be doing this in addition to everything else I'm doing? And my response to that is taking the time to record the various intermediate steps doesn't really add to what you're doing, because I guarantee you're doing that at least in your head already, because there's no way you can do legal work, which is a subset of knowledge work. And one of the hallmarks of knowledge work is you need to figure out what the intermediate steps are before you do it. For better or worse, it's not like you arrive in the office and step up to the assembly line and start putting together legal widgets. No, you have to figure out what the steps are. And all I'm saying is do that thinking on paper. It will only increase the quality of it, and certainly it's easier to intersperse different projects with one another when this is in writing. So once you have that list, think about, look at your calendar, figure out how much discretionary time you have during the week. I call that the time that isn't otherwise taken up by meetings or appointments or telephone calls. I don't like to call it free time, because it really isn't free, and I kind of rubbing it into people. But figure out how much discretionary time you have, and then based on that, even if you have all your discretionary time this week, your shorter-term list should be the equivalent of no more than what can fit on one page, whether it's handwritten in a reasonable size or word processed with a reasonable font. Meaning, 2.5 to 3 dozen individual discrete tasks. And some people hear that suggestion and they think, well, no, wait a minute, there's 60 things I need to get done this week. To which my response is, well, put down the 2 dozen most important things. You can always go back and add more. And here's where the mental gymnastics really come into play, because I think it's much sounder to have a shorter-term list and be very ruthless about prioritizing what fits on that list, and then complete the list and think, I finished it, let me add more, than it is to have a 6-page list that you don't even get a third of the way through during the week. So you have that shorter-term list, and that's the intermediate layer of the pyramid. And then the top part of that pyramid is, and again, I've got multiple names for this list. It's either the daily list or the immediate term list. And I say, because sometimes, if you're working on something major, your immediate term list may not change for a few days, or it may change several times within one day. So don't be locked into what you call it. But basically, it's use this as the tool to help you decide what you're going to be doing next. And here I'm very kind of tough love about it. It really should be no more than 6 individual items. And that's assuming you have basically the full working day to do it. And if people say, well, there are 20 things I need to get done today, similarly, that's what I'd say for the weekly list. I'd say, okay, put down the 6 most important items.
Right.
When you're done with that, you can always go back and add more.
Mm-hmm.
And then within that daily list with the 3 items, you do want to prioritize, just figure out the top 3.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to prioritize anything else in the other lists, because I would say it's, you shouldn't be figuring out if something's number 17 or number 18. You should be working on number 1.
Yep.
So once you have the prioritized list, then you're in a position to really make this to-do list a very powerful tool, and do what I call honor the to-do list. And honoring the to-do list means you stick with the list in the order in which you prioritized it, unless you make a conscious choice that circumstances have changed to justify going off the list or changing the list. And that's everything from, the latest emergency comes up and it's a no-brainer that you're going to turn to responding to the TRO. Or you, as long as you pause and ask yourself and really have confidence in the answer, then that fits that criterion. So if you say, I was going to work for another hour, but right now I've been working for 3 hours nonstop and I can see the smoke coming out of my ears, I think the best use of my time right now is to get up and walk around, take a lap around the office, or maybe go outside and walk around the block. As long as you pause and convince yourself, yes, it really is the most appropriate thing, then you're still honoring the to-do list. Mm-hmm. And by definition, honoring the to-do list means you're doing the most important thing at any given moment. And by definition, that's good time management. Mm-hmm. And think how different it is thinking in those terms instead of the terms of, I've got to finish everything on my to-do list.
Right.
I actually had a client who put it this way. She said, it is not my job to complete every item on my to-do list. It is my job to make judgments about the relative priority of the items on the list and to be responsible for those judgments.
Yes.
So if you're looking at your daily list and think in day-type compartments, and your goal is to honor your to-do list during the time that you've decided is appropriate for work, and I do recommend having an end time so you don't think throughout the day, if I don't get it done, I can always stay late.
Yeah.
Have a time that you plan to stop working. But if that's the goal, my goal is to honor the to-do list, from 10 to 8 to whatever the time is for that. By definition, that's your goal for the day. That's good time management. Mm-hmm. And then you start afresh the next day with a recalibrated to-do list. So think how much nicer that is than thinking, you've got a big long to-do list, you only finished 3 things, now you have to come back tomorrow and add to it. It's like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. Yeah. You never can get ahead. And also the inherent flexibility about thinking in terms of honoring the to-do list means that if an emergency arises and you turn to it, you're doing what's at the top of the to-do list. Mm-hmm. So, taking your kid to the emergency room is automatically number 1 on the to-do list. And instead of getting frustrated, it's like, there's so much I didn't get done. It's like, things changed. I'm now doing, what's number 1 on the to-do list. Mm-hmm. And the reason I really like the pyramid as a geometric illustration of how this to-do system fits together is at the very top of it is a point, is one single item. And the goal is, once you've done your, kind of long-term planning and think about your goals and chop them down into their individual parts, and some of the things, maybe on your back burner list of goals because you're not going to get to that right away, and then have your weekly planning, come up with your 1-page worth of things you want to get to this week, and then come up with your 6-item, immediate plan, and then come up with what's number 1. Then your goal is to focus on number 1 without multitasking, without jumping back and forth during the time that you're is appropriate to focus on that, because you really can't focus on multiple things simultaneously. No, yeah. And the beauty of focusing on whatever turns out to be number 1 after you've gone through this whole planning process means, first of all, that you're focusing on something that you can say with a relatively high degree of confidence really is the right thing to be focusing on. Mm-hmm. So you're not distracted by all those thoughts about, what about this, what about the other? Mm-hmm. You've incorporated that in your system. And secondly, it really does allow you to concentrate on that because everything else will get your attention in due course. Yeah. So being organized in the to-do sense is more than just, the benefit is more than just being organized. It really does allow you the possibility of qualitatively doing better work because it allows you the freedom to focus without being distracted by everything else you were trying to keep in mind. Instead, it's in the to-do system. Mm-hmm. So once it gets into the to-do system, you can, and you should, forget about it until the time comes to review that particular list next. That's one of the beauties of it. You can clear your brain for execution, and then when you do the planning, you're thinking strategy. So it really does allow you to do better work. Mm-hmm. So the task management system is one of the 2 pillars of good time management. And the other pillar is having a solid approach to managing information. And there's this chicken and egg phenomenon, and I really kind of alternate in seminars which one I talk about first, task management versus information management, because you need to review the information that comes to you. And I'll talk primarily in terms of email, because that's primarily where most people get most of their information now. But it's important to realize the same information management principles apply pretty much to no matter what format it comes to you. So you basically use what comes to you by email to populate within your to-do system.
Right.
But it's important to have a to-do system to park the things that come to you by email, because you can't turn to everything right away. So a couple thoughts about dealing with information, dealing with email. The biggest tension comes when I hear people say, I try to get things done, but that email keeps interrupting me all day. So the idea is to become strategic about how often you triage your email and how often you process your email. I want to be very clear about what the distinction is between the two. Triaging is just when you glance at something very quickly and say, is this something that can wait until it's time for me to actually turn and stop what I'm doing at the moment and turn and process my entire email.
Right.
And then processing is when you go through all the email that's arrived since the last time you processed it. And for each and every one you say, what is this? What, if anything, do I need to do with it? Should I do the task right away? And here the principle that comes into play is the 2-minute principle. And what the 2-minute principle basically says, if it's something you can do relatively quickly, and you're not timing it, so it's not 2 minutes exactly.
Right.
You play it by ear. But if it's something you can do relatively quickly and easily the first time you get it, by all means do it the first time you process it. Because there's some things that are so short and it doesn't even make any sense to put them in your to-do system. But if things that are longer than that, then you integrate them into your to-do system in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's actually, writing down what the task is, incorporating email in your to-do system, whether it's aggregating the to-dos in a separate folder within your email system where you put pending items that are actionable, whether it's, one of the reasons personally I like the Outlook task function is it's very easy to integrate email and tasks, because you basically just it feels like you basically drag the email to task, and what that does is it creates a task, but there's a link to the email, so it's all in there. Because so some people basically use their email inbox as their to-do list, and the reason I think it requires a slightly higher level of nuance than that is that system would work if two conditions were met. One is that all your to-dos come to you by email, and everything in your email is a to-do, and probably that's not the case. So what you want to do is you process your email is move it along, set up an information pipeline. So if you don't need it anymore, ideally delete it if you don't need it anymore. And by the way, all this, of course, put through your own professional common sense filter, subject to whatever requirements there are in your particular organization. But you want to delete as much as you're allowed to do. The things you want to save, you either want to put it in separate folders or one giant folder and use categorize functions within that, but then have a separate folder for actionable items so that when you're done processing, basically your inbox is empty. And the beauty of that is then you can tell for certain what you haven't even processed yet, reduces the risk of losing something within your inbox. I do like to say that there's no technique that's really wrong. If it works for you, terrific, keep it up. And one technique that some people say works for them and other people find it somewhat dysfunctional is using flags. So identify emails that require response. And the problem with that I've seen too often is that you end up then with this giant email inbox, and every third or half to a third are flagged, and how can you decide from that what you should be doing next?
Exactly.
The reason I think it's a better practice to insert the actual to-do in your to-do system is just looking at the email doesn't really always tell you what is to do. You need to do some thinking there. So you take the opportunity of inserting in your to-do list the actual task or tasks you're supposed to do instead of having to look at the subject line and read the email again and figure out, okay, now what was I supposed to do with this again? Because if you're doing that and you're just churning through your email to try to figure out what to do next, you're probably looking at the same email over and over again and thinking that thought multiple times. And whenever you have a thought multiple times, there's definitely room for efficiency. The other reason I'm not a fan of flags is that unless you are extremely rigorous about unflagging things that no longer should be flagged, the flags become not only unhelpful, they become actively an impediment to doing good work, because you look at a flag and you think, well, is it still an active flag or should I have unflagged it? And you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of something that I every now and then see advertised in these catalogs for home improvement. And I have to laugh at it because I find it the most outrageously useless and time-sucking kind of item. And what it is, it's this magnet you're supposed to put on your dishwasher. It says clean on one side and dirty on the other. And in theory, I suppose it makes sense, but in practice, who's going to trust the magnet?
No.
You look at the magnet and then you say, oh, did I forget to flip the magnet? Let me look inside the dishwasher to see if it really is clean or dirty. So basically, it's adding an extra unnecessary, unreliable step to the whole process. And flagging emails is like that as well. So instead of flagging, include them in your to-do list. So that's what processing is. So how often to triage? That's a very personal thing, and it really depends on the demands of your position. Certainly, when I work in law firms, and I ask for people, well, how long do you think you can go before responding to an email? You know, what do you think is a professional time period within which you need to respond to an email that does not have independent indicia of urgency? Meaning it's not, it doesn't demand an action, or it's not from the particular partner that you know if you don't respond immediately, he's going to be calling you to see if you got it. And I can almost draw a graph with a straight line. The more junior the attorney, the more frequently she thinks she has to respond. Whereas as you get more experience, you think, it's okay if I focus on what I'm working on for another 10, 20 minutes before I respond. And that actually helps people rather than being interrupted constantly. So the idea is it's a very individual decision for each attorney to decide, should you constantly keep an eye on your email to see if there's anything that you need to turn to right away, or should you maybe triage it every 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes? Because there's no wrong answer, but there's definitely a cost-benefit analysis everyone should do consciously. Do you want to pay the cost of constant interruptions, and the benefit is you can have a reputation of being very responsive, or do you want to get the benefit of having 15, 20, 30 minutes of uninterrupted concentration, and you're responding within that time period. And the thing is, it's not even you have to decide which one you're going to do all the time. It can change during the time of day and days of the week or the situation. But the idea is you want to avoid the worst case scenario, which I think too many attorneys are in, which is they've never sat down and done this cost benefit analysis consciously, so they're constantly interrupted by email and constantly being annoyed by the fact that they're interrupted by email, when it really is under their control to just turn off the prompt and set a timer to check it periodically. Because I do know there are some attorneys who say, I want to be incredibly responsive to my clients, and if that means being interrupted by email all the time, I'm happy to pay that. And I'll say, great, whatever approach you want to do. But that's just for triaging. Even if you're constantly triaging, it really makes sense to batch the processing of it. Because if you constantly turn to it each time, then you're constantly task switching. And it's not quite the same as multitasking, because you're not in any instant focusing on both at the same time. But whenever you task switch, there are costs in terms of regaining your train of thought and getting back into it. And again, it's very much the way you think and the way you work and the nature of your practice. I mean, I know some litigators may be quick about turning on a dime or have a lot of answers. And I know I just recently worked with a person who did a high-level tax. And he said, I really need to get into something and think about it for a while and conceptualize it, and it just doesn't work if I go back and forth. So the idea is that there's no wrong answer here, but think about what's appropriate for you and experiment with it. The nice thing about all of these time management techniques is you'll never hear me say, trust me, it works. I'll say, try it and see how it works for you. And when you try it, visualize yourself as both the rat in the maze and the scientist holding the clipboard taking notes on the rat. You want to see, how does this actually work with me in the real world? And it's very dynamic, and you want to be aware that it will change over time. That's just the nature of the beast. So in trying to figure out what techniques to use, you don't want to be a perfectionist and try to get the best technique out there. You want to get a technique that you think makes sense and then live with it and see how it works in the real world. I realize I do want to talk briefly now about the format of the to-do list.
Oh,
I talked about the concept of it and how to use it. But now, to the nuts and bolts, whether you should handwrite it or put it in a Word document or however you, Outlook or something else. Here's where it actually is a little tricky for lawyers. Because of confidentiality requirements, it is problematic for many attorneys to use the app on their iPhone, an unsecured iPhone, and use it for client kinds of things. So you need to be careful about that. But even within a secure environment, it really is very individual. And the nice thing about thinking of the to-do list as a pyramid is that you can use different formats for the different lists. Mm-hmm. For example, for the shorter term list, for that 6-item list, personally, I think handwritten on a smallish Post-it note is a very good technology because it's very, very flexible, very easy to do. For the medium term, the one-pager, that also is not so long that handwritten wouldn't work, but some people like to use a subset of Outlook, or some people like to even just word process that. Mm-hmm. But what's so interesting is I see many people relying on a handwritten to-do list, even people of a generation that you think that wouldn't. Yeah. Millennials or Gen, whatever we're calling the next generation, even after Gen Y. I don't think they've decided what we're calling them yet. And that's because there's an immediacy and a tangibility of having that handwritten to-do list. You don't have to futz around with technology, but also the mechanics of actually writing something by hand really gets it into your brain in a way that keyboarding does not, and certainly reading something that's been previously keyboarding does not. So some people like to handwrite their to-do list just because at the end of it, they have a much clearer sense of what's going on, and if that works, terrific. Yeah. But if you like the approach of this master list of everything, you're not going to be wanting to rewrite that 37-page to-do list. So at least with that one, that's where having a word processed version and a word processed version of your various project-specific to-do lists come into play. What's also important to think about is how you want to capture items for your to-do system when you're away from your main to-do system. Yeah. And at this point, personally, I just send myself an email because email is an intrinsic part of the system. But whatever system you use, whether you're carrying around a little notebook and you write things in, think about how you're going to integrate that into the main to-do system. And the answer for that is whenever you gather information when you're not at the main system, you need to process that information to insert it into the to-do system. And it's helpful to think about it in terms of both one-off ideas and things that people kind of throw at you when you're passing them in the hall. But it's also helpful to think about that in terms, in methodical terms, specifically about when you're in a meeting and you're taking detailed notes. Yeah. Probably within those notes, there are a lot of follow-up tasks involved in that. So it should be considered part of your best practice that after the meeting, you want to go through the notes and process them just as if you'd processed any information that came to you by email. Look through that and say, let me do the 2-minute task right away, the longer task, let me integrate that into the to-do system, and be very clear in your own mind what items within your office you've processed and no longer have live to-dos somewhere in them, versus things that you've processed and are filed away and you don't have to use them as inputs to your to-do system, which is another reason why the to-do system actually integrates with how you maintain your office. Yeah. Because there are a lot of people, and I certainly was one of them, and maybe I should say now, one of the reasons I find this affinity for time management is because while I do have the organizational sense, I also, I'm human and I procrastinate, and I've certainly, occasionally my office can get way out of control. So the reason I do this is because I know what it's like when things are crazy. Right. So I definitely understand that, and certainly not holding myself out as a paragon. But the idea is a lot of people use what I call the pile system, and I say that because I used it for many years myself, which is you're working on 10 different projects, you have 10 different piles on your desk and all the paper. And interestingly, these days, usually within that paper are merely printouts of things that are available electronically anyway. People still like to occasionally have that tangibility and immediacy of having that hard copy just because sometimes it's easier to read and synthesize and see lots of things simultaneously when they're printed out. Yeah. And so they keep the piles of things to do. And one of the functions of that piles is it's basically a physical to-do list that reminds them of what they need to do. The problem is that's a dysfunctional approach for a couple reasons. One is it works, but it works at the wrong time, because if you're working on project A and the piles for projects B through L are lined up in front of you, every time you look up and your eye falls on the pile, it's like it's screaming out, work on me, work on me, work on me, which is distracting. So you want to, get it in a file, get it off your desk. But a lot of people don't like to do that because they're afraid, out of sight, out of mind. How am I going to remember to do it? And that's where the to-do system comes in. If you use the to-do system as a tool to help declutter your office, and here I will say I wrote an article called "Yes, You Can Learn to Keep Your Desk Clutter-Free," which is available for download free on my website. And the idea is you declutter your office, and as part of that, you incorporate the to-dos that you come across as you're decluttering in your to-do system, so you no longer need the paper to remind you to do it. So the to-do system is a core not just of how you manage your time, but also how you physically can get organized. So that is the long, detailed answer to your question. Do you have any tips for time management?
No, that's so helpful. I know a lot of that will help me going forward too. I really I would love the pyramid way of thinking about it with the longer term than short term daily. That's so helpful. Yeah. So I guess moving on, what are some common triggers or pitfalls that you've seen with your clients? Like, where do you most often see people getting bogged down?
Pretty much when they're looking for the perfect system. And the thing is, there is no perfect system. It's like, where's the perfect place to live? What's the perfect car to drive?
Right.
There are always trade-offs, and especially for time management and organization, it's very individual. There are pluses and minuses with anything. Plus, there is no way to know in advance for certain how it will work for you. So you want to come up with something that's reasonably good, and then live with it and let it evolve over time, and don't have your ego in it, and let it use it how it really works for you. Because it's always interesting when I hear people say, "Oh, I've got this really pretty notebook. Okay, how should I use it?" It's like, well, that's kind of a solution looking for a problem there, isn't it? So the idea is, and allow yourself some messiness within the system. It's not going to be perfect, and that's okay, because if you spent all the time trying to get a perfect system, that's all you'd be doing.
Right.
So give yourself the flexibility to have the organizational equivalent of a junk drawer here or there. That's absolutely fine. And similar to that is the whole kind of all or nothing thinking. I worry that people will come to my programs and get all fired up and go back and clean up their offices and set up their systems, and then they'll work on it for a while, and then they'll get really busy and they'll stop doing it, and they'll think, oh, well, I blew it. But what I've observed is that it's part of the dynamic of work that you will get busy and you will kind of put to the back burner the organizational kinds of things. But then when you finish a major deadline, that's when you kind of want to get back up to speed. So kind of get used to the organizational level, or even the use of your to-do system is kind of waxing and waning. It's because you haven't looked at it for a while, whether it's through because it's vacation time or whether you're really busy on a particular project or pure old-fashioned sloth. It's okay to kind of hit the reset button and say, okay, I'm going to start again, and use the fact that you kind of know how to learn how to get back on the horse, so you don't worry about when you fall off the horse. And how you get back onto it is you start wherever you are, process your email, populate your to-do system, come up with that one-pager and then the shorter term, and work for there. So learning how to recover, I think, is very important. The third pitfall I wanted to mention is the idea of people are so busy dealing with the day-to-day that they don't take time to step back and think about systems. And the idea is, I'm a huge fan of checklists and systems and procedures, so that each time you're doing something, you're not figuring out how to do it afresh. You don't want to reinvent the wheel. So, and I'm talking very low tech. So let's say you try to. I'll give you a perfect example. One time I was in Word, and the whatever you call all those buttons and grids and stuff at the top, it disappeared.
Oh, yeah.
Because I must have, selected something wrong. It's like, oh man, how do I find that again? And of course, it took me a while to, just trying different things, and Googling to figure out how to put it back there. And of course, once you know how to do it, it takes 3 seconds. You just select this and choose that and do that. But what you want to do in that circumstance is, I have a whole file of things. I call it my how-to file. So I created a document that says how to, how to. And here, it was so hard to Google because I didn't even know what to call it. So how to, make the ruler reappear in Word, I think is what I called it. And so if that happens again, instead of having to refigure it out, I just go to my how-to system.
Nice.
So it's a very low-tech kind of knowledge management version, but the idea is whenever you do something that you think you may have to do again, take a moment and document that, so you don't have to refigure out how to do that. So it's kind of thinking simultaneously big picture and immediate each time. And once you kind of systematize that, then the question is, should I stick with the system as I did it, or is it time to kind of reassess the system? And it's kind of it makes it kind of a fun, interesting challenge to figure out what are the various little systems and procedures and things that I should do. And it's interesting. I think the idea really does come from, I would say that putting a good spin on it says I'm a big fan of efficiency, but another way to say it is it's easier. You should, access your inner sloth. How can I get there with as minimal, mental effort as possible? Okay, I'm going to write it down and review it and only reassess it if it doesn't work again.
Yeah. That's a good idea.
Taking the time to document systems from day to day, I think is another pitfall.
Oh, great. And another pretty common struggle is striking a balance between kind of big picture strategizing and thinking and various incoming tasks that just come at you one after the other. So how do you advise people to kind of handle that?
And that's very much a function of time. And I think getting into routine, getting into the ritual, and I do like to call it weekly planning, although, whenever you do it, it's better than not doing it at all. But there's something about the week, and I don't know whether it's how we're set up as a society or how we're set up neurologically as human beings, but something about the 7-day period is a very good interval because it allows you to make measurable progress towards even long-term goals, but it's also short enough so you can think about the minutiae of day-to-day life. Okay, let me redo my market activity and figuring out how to deal with this client, and also figure out when I can get to the dry cleaner so I can pick up the suit so I can go in and to court and be the best lawyer I can be. So if you can actually schedule on your calendar, once a week or so, to sit down and kind of closet yourself off from the hustle and bustle and say, okay, let me revisit my big picture goals. Let me revisit my motivation. Why am I doing this? Because when you ask people, why are you a lawyer, sometimes you'll get really good answers, and sometimes you'll get, I don't know. I used to know, but I don't know now.
Right.
I really have to think about that. So if people do think about that and reflect on that and ask themselves the big question, I think most of the time you can come up with an answer that is right for them. And it's so important then to record that so that when things get difficult, when the goal gets fuzzy, you can pull that out and remind yourself and basically fan the flames of motivation. Because once you've done that, you see that every individual task you do is somehow tied to that bigger picture, that goal of being the best lawyer you can be. Even something as simple as processing your email. It's not just one more thing I have to do today. No, it's a key. It's an intrinsic part of the standard housekeeping you need to do in order to stay on top of your practice. And when you see that as like one strand of a very complex web of things that you want to do to achieve your goals, it ennobles even the smallest task and infuses it with meaning and inspires you to do it, well and properly, because you never know which one small piece will make a big difference.
Right.
So anyway, so once a week or so, if you get a sense of the big picture and get a sense of your goals, and then figure out how that translates to the daily. And again, that ties back to the to-do list pyramid.
Yeah.
Once a week or so, you review that big longer-term list and then create your medium list, and then each day you look at the daily list. I think is a reasonable balance to start out in toggling back and forth between the big picture and the immediate. So start with that, and then adjust, and your mileage may vary.
Yeah. Great. And sort of related, but a little different. I know for myself, my sometimes my daily have-to-do list just keeps expanding and multiplying, and it's harder to find times for the want-to-do list, like bigger picture things, and it's hard to kind of push those up to the top sometimes. So do you have any advice for kind of managing that dynamic?
Sure. Well, actually, I have two answers to that. And the first one, and I expect to get pushback from this. I remember having a big conversation with someone who really disagreed with this, and that is, my philosophy is there really are no have-to-dos.
Yeah.
There really aren't, because, and the reason that's important, and we don't have we don't have the time to get into it today, but the idea of, I have to do this, I have to do that,
right.
that actually sets yourself up for procrastination because you're thinking, I have to, but I don't want to. Whereas if you back up and say, anything that I do because I've made an implicit or maybe an explicit cost-benefit analysis. So, one of the have to do is, yes, I have to get this memo in today because I told the partner I would and the client needs it. Well, you still don't have to, as long as you're willing to deal with the consequences of not doing it. And sometimes the consequences are so dire we lose sight of the fact that it is a choice. Yes. But if you back up and say, well, don't want to get the benefits of getting it in or reap the consequences of not, you're underscoring that it really is a choice for you. And as long as you're realizing that it's a choice, then you're in the best position to make the best decisions that are right for you. So it's never have to versus want to. It's like, well, I kind of want to do all of this, and yes, I want to achieve my goals in my job because that's important for now. So that's part of the answer, and that's kind of the philosophical answer. But here's a practical answer, because of course I know what you mean when you say you have to get it done, even though technically you don't.
Right.
Realistically speaking, if you want to keep your job, you do.
Exactly.
But how you get time to do those things that are important to you, but they're not kind of blinking red, they're not immediately urgent, is to convince yourself just as viscerally as you can that it really is so important for you. And I'll give you the prototypical activity that falls into this category for many people, and that's exercise.
Yes.
It's important, but every day everything else seems to be more important. So let's take that, although you can put into that anything else that is important but not intrinsically urgent. So things like in-depth analysis or professional reading or even taking time to do a lot of this planning all falls into this category. And how you find time to do that is you convince yourself just as vehemently as you can that it really is so important to you, so crucial, that you imbue that activity or that task with an artificial urgency for a limited period of time. For example, let's say you've convinced yourself that, yes, exercising, 4 days a week really is important and it's on your schedule for today, and yes, there are other things you could be doing, but you say, you know what, it's just a 40-minute workout, it'll be 60 minutes door-to-door from my desk, do I think I can, quote-unquote, get away with it? Yeah. And most of the time you think, well, under the radar, I think I can. So you say, because right now there really is nothing more important. And you kind of make that argument to yourself. And actually, here's where being a lawyer can help, because you know how to argue both sides. So argue the side from, because if you say something else is more important to displace exercise, you can make that argument every single day and then never get around to exercise, and that's not going to work. So just say, I've already decided in advance that, from 5 to 6, from Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday is when I'm going to exercise. So unless something is so crucial during that time, that's what I'm going to do. And then keep it relatively short, so it's easier to implement. And then when you come back, kind of ask yourself, okay, did I get away with it this time? But ultimately realize that no one else is going to be giving you permission to do those things that you know are important, but there are other things that you could do. And ultimately it's deciding to do, okay, I'm going to make this binary decision, yes, I'm going to do it, or no, I'm not, and live with the consequences and own the consequences, because it really is your own choice. It's your time and it's your life. And when you realize that there really is no difference between your time and your life, and how important it is to take ownership of that, then you're really in the best situation to invest the time and energy to make good decisions about how you use your time, and to enjoy the benefits of the results, or live with the consequences.
Well, that's a really good way to think about it. Thank you. Well, Meg, thank you so much for being a guest on our podcast today. It was a pleasure to talk to you and learn about all the various strategies for better time management. I know I certainly picked up lots of useful tips for myself.
Oh, my pleasure, Eva. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks again for listening to our interview with Meg Spencer Dixon. We thank Meg for being so generous with her time and for sharing her expertise with us. You can learn more about Meg and Spencer Consulting and access her articles about time management at her website, www.timemanagementforlawyers.com. To listen to more podcasts, visit www.probonoinst.org/podcast, and be sure to subscribe on iTunes or YouTube. We hope you enjoyed this special episode, and we'll see you next time on the Pro Bono Happy Hour.